happens in Texas doesn't just stay in Texas.
This state board of ed has power far beyond our borders.
Our history, the literal history of America, is in their hands. Demonstrators lined up outside the Texas Board of Education today to protest what this board wants to do. They're being called the textbook wars. The Board of Education in Texas is now deciding just what will be in our children's textbooks. Mark Wilson's been looking us over tonight. Mark, why such a big deal about this?
Well, frankly, it's a big deal because everybody wants a say in these hearings. Right now in Austin, the final public hearing's underway. More than 200 people have signed up. They all want to have their voice heard. And this really could affect what millions of students all across our country learn. So how can that be? Well, how can Texas have such an impact? Texas is so big, of course. They buy so many textbooks. It is the second largest textbook buying state. So their standards are often published and used all across the rest of the country. Now, that said, this has now become a political battle. Conservatives say the proposed curriculum changes promote patriotism and would correct years of liberal bias in some books. Liberals accuse conservatives of inserting their political and religious views into these standards.
My mom, reading through these texts with me, who's a very well-educated woman, says this is taking us in a direction towards the way I was taught in the 1940s.
To use it to sort of wipe out religion, religious expression, which is the way it's usually used, is an improper use of the term, and it bears no resemblance to what the Constitution actually says.
So some of the changes, take a look, include adding text to say the country's founding fathers were guided by Christian principle. And they would also require students to learn about affirmative action in Title IX legislation. Now, they also want to replace the word capitalism with free enterprise system. And then here's a big one a lot of people are talking about. Rename the slave trade the Atlantic Triangular Trade. So remember, the standards that are agreed on during these hearings will last a long time, about 10 years. So there's a lot of at stake here tonight, and a final vote should come on Friday.
All right, lots of opinions about this textbook issue. And joining me now to talk more about it is Todd Schnitt. Now, he's got a national syndicated radio talk show. I know you've heard him at some time or other. It's heard all over the country, the Schnitt Show. Now, Todd, I'm curious, your listeners who are tuned in all over the country, do they know that Texas is setting a standard for the country here?
Yeah, this story has popped up in the national media now for several months, and I think that a lot of the audience is in tune with the fact that this is a debate and it's coming down to a vote on Friday.
Yeah, now this conservative right in Texas that's making these decisions, they say they're correcting a lot of liberal bias in textbooks. You think there's a lot of liberal bias in textbooks?
There's no doubt about it that bias does exist, and the conservatives that you're talking about in Texas, I believe the board is consisting of 15 or so of the so-called conservatives. And I think there is a deal of liberal bias that does need to be addressed and fixed to really balance out the textbooks that our children read.
You might give us some examples here, because I see that basically, topically, they say democratic societies become constitutional republics, capitalism is no longer preferred to free enterprise, and they want to justify the McCarthy era to say the communists did infiltrate the government. But take us a little bit beyond that.
Yeah, there are documented cases of liberal bias in textbooks. I've seen them. I've read about it for years. I pulled an example. There's a textbook called A History of the U.S. All People Since 1945, which is written by Joy Hakem. And for example, there's a section on presidential inaugural balls. And of the Reagan inaugural ball, the caption on the photo is Nancy and Ronald Reagan at one of their inauguration parties held in Washington's Air and Space Museum. A black tie mink diamond affair. It was the fanciest, most expensive inauguration in the history of America, costing 5 times more than Jimmy Carter's inaugural ball. Yeah. Okay, but then you look at the caption for the Kennedy photo. President Kennedy and his wife Jackie on their way to the inaugural ball, her glamour nearly stole the show. I mean, clearly there's bias on what was written on the Reagan caption versus these Democratic presidents.
You're a conservative talk show host. Does it trouble you one way or the other that they are moving a little bit more toward your point of view?
Some of the examples that I've seen of what this board in Texas wants to do, in some cases I think they're evening out history. I think that they're properly representing history. I think there has been such a liberal bias in some of these textbooks for many, many years. I think we're starting to get maybe a better reflection of history.
Well, thanks very much for being with us, Todd Schnitt, for coming in. You can catch the Schnitt Show afternoons on WFLA Radio. And Todd, we'll see you on the radio. All right, let's take a moment now for a personal note here, and this is my view. Texas is a wonderful state. Love Texas, love the Alamo, but I don't think we want the far right or the left wing of any political party putting our textbooks together. When I was in Moscow some years ago, I was horrified to open a high school American history book and find out they were telling Russian students that half of all Americans live in shacks. And you know, for years, Chinese students thought China won World War II. Textbook publishers should be the protectors of history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Local school officials and publishers do have some say-so, and they need to exercise it now. One of the outrageous changes they want in Texas would play down the role of Thomas Jefferson, who tried as hard as he could to separate religion from government. One professor explained it this way: a bunch of facts are being altered to favor a conservative philosophy because liberals did it first, and textbooks are only about 80% truth anyway, and whatever is left is in somebody's presidential library. That's my view.
All right, John, thank you. New